operation anyway. I'll show you my you might notice that I have the rear foot way back. You probably won't be able to see that in the video, the way the camera is aimed, and I can't really change the aim of the camera right now, but with the grinding you don't have to have your foot back that far because you're not using a lot of horizontal force to move it. But with the polishing, you tend to have a lot of horizontal force you have to use sometimes. So I sort of stand with my right foot right up against the barrel and my back foot, my rear foot about, my right foot about 2 feet back. And that way I can lean over like that and get some good leverage when I'm moving the mirror back and forth. It's just sort of a natural position. I've read about it in a book, telescope making book, that that's the position you're supposed to have when you're polishing. But in actual fact, that's a position that seems to work out real well. It just sort of forms there naturally while you're doing it. I'm trying to stick to tell you what's going on and stick to the polishing as accurate as I can. You know what I mean? It's a little hard to explain things while I'm actually working and trying to concentrate on the polishing, but I'm using longer than normal strokes in a W pattern now. You can see the W pattern pretty clear there, I hope. The mirror is alternating back and forth. I'm not counting the strokes very well now. That's not too serious though, just as long as you have around 8 or 10 each time. Texel's book recommends not only varying the stroke length and that, but also varying the number of strokes at each position. So he's trying to avoid you getting into a pattern of any kind that has any type of repetitious behavior in it, so as to give the law of averages, the random law of averages, the best chance to operate when getting the final surface on the mirror. It also helps to avoid things like primary ripple too when you have a more random pattern. Sometimes the tool surface can put a pattern right into the mirror. It usually is not deep enough to cause any severe optical problems, but you can see that it causes a certain amount of ripple on the surface of the mirror on a small scale. There's no such thing as a really perfect polish and a really perfect optical system. Just the action of polishing alone creates little waves on the surface of the mirror called micro ripple, and the waves are usually a little bit worse with the high-speed polishing agent. They're, you know, maybe just a quarter of an inch wide or something like that. Sometimes you can see them in the Foucault test. They're so intense. So the final figuring, even though the Barnsite is good for removing the pits and that, the final figuring is usually done with red jeweler's rouge, which polishes much more slowly, but has a tendency to produce far less ripple. And also the law of averages are better when you're using unusual strokes to try and remove high zones and stuff like that on various parts of the mirror. You don't want to have them knocked off too quickly because you want the law of averages to have a chance to work better, and you want the pitch squares to have a chance to flow and conform to this changing shape of the mirror, especially in parabolizing. So generally most people figure a mirror with red jeweler's rouge. You really don't have to do much when you're changing in the figuring over from polishing with Barnsite to polishing with rouge. All I do is just seal up the Barnsite jar and open the rouge jar and maybe rinse the brush off under tap or something, and just stick the same brush into the rouge jar and use it, because it doesn't matter if the Barnsite and the rouge are a little bit cross-contaminated. Mostly it'll be the rouge doing the work when you add it. So it's not really a tremendous deal to cross-contaminate the rouge and the Barnsite a little bit, I don't think. I'll tell you another thing too that's very, very, that helps you, think that things are not as serious as they might be. The optical requirements for a large mirror like this are not quite as severe as they are for, say, a 6 or an 8-inch mirror, because you don't tend to get seeing conditions good enough to use a telescope this size to its full resolving power very often. So if there's a slight defect, like a zone in a 20-inch mirror that's out a little bit, or a trace of spherical aberration, it usually doesn't show up in the final image very much. So I'm hoping that this will be worn out enough pretty soon, dry enough, that I can add a little bit of polishing agent with the brush, decentering the mirror, and just showing you how I do it. This is polishing really beautifully today. This is the best polishing I think I've had so far as just being easy to use. This is really good. It's starting to bind a little bit more now, and I think that's because the pitch squares are drying out from evaporation. as you could probably guess, a lot of mechanical work moving this back and forth is transformed into heat by friction of the pitch. It tends to make the pitch a little bit softer, and it tends to dry out the squares a little bit faster as you polish for more than half an hour or so. So you could tell right away when the pitch needs water added, because all of a sudden the thing almost seizes up and it won't move. Sometimes you can hear a squeaking noise out of it when you rotate it, especially. And that's a noise caused by the glass rubbing against the pitch, which is almost bare of water. Almost no water on it, almost completely dry. So it's very interesting to hear that. You probably won't hear it on the camera if I do it, but I'm just sort of using medium length strokes now, around 1/3 or a little less. I'm a little apprehensive of using long strokes for another reason on this, and that's because I'm using a tool that's 1.5 inches smaller in diameter than the mirror. So you don't want to produce a hyperboloid surface by having real long strokes. So, but on the other hand, you have to have the strokes long enough from time to time so that the edge of the mirror, like I was mentioning before, is rubbing against the pitch. So a mixture of strokes is usually a good idea. You want to give the law of averages every opportunity you can from a conscious perspective to end up with a perfectly spherical surface at the end of polishing with no serious defects in it. That's why as I say, I don't listen to music when I'm polishing. I was thinking of doing it, but when I started polishing, I realized that it's better that my consciousness be completely in tune with the polishing operation as much as possible anyway. So this may be my last day of actual polishing to remove pits left over from the fine grinding. I read that guy that wrote I'll have to give you his name, that wrote the article on making large telescope mirrors, said that usually 10 or 12 hours of total polishing time is enough to remove the pits left over from fine grinding. The last grade of abrasive I used was 9 micron abrasive, 9 micron sized particles in diameter. And Texturo's book, How to Make a Telescope, in that book, Texturo says that if you use particle sizes for your fine grinding abrasive smaller than about 10 microns or so, you're not going to polish them out any faster, the pits, than if you use 10 micron abrasive, because the finer abrasive still leaves a few scattered pits here and there that are quite large. And it takes about the same amount of time, almost exactly, to polish out a fine ground surface done with 10 micron abrasive as it does with 3 micron abrasive. You wouldn't think so, but that's what Texturo says, and I imagine he's probably right. So that's why I stopped after 9 microns. I figured that was probably good enough for my purposes, and it seems to be polishing out very well. I think in the video I'll be showing you photographs of a reflected light bulb that I took with my digital camera, the still camera, showing the results of the way it looks, the reflection in the glass looks from the bulb on the ceiling. To the naked eye, it looks completely polished right now, in fact. It looks just beautiful. But when you reflect the light bulb from the ceiling, you can see a scattered grayness over the mirror. So the trick is to thoroughly do the fine grinding with every grade. Do it about 20 charges of abrasive, or something like that, maybe 15 to 20 charges with each grade of fine abrasive. And if you do it right, it should be just fine for the polishing. You won't, you'll have just a nice uniform bunch of pits without any large deep ones scattered through it that won't polish out. Texturo says, by the way, that such large pits optically don't do much damage to the image. If you do have what he calls scattered grayness on the mirror, it's usually not very severe to the actual performance of the telescope. It's about the same as having maybe a thin layer of dust on the mirror, just a few dust particles or something. So I'm not that worried about getting it just perfect, but on the other hand, if you can, just a few more hours of polishing will do the job, you might as well do it, because after you figure it, if you do get an accurate mirror, you won't want to go back and remove the pits, a few crummy pits, just to have a perfectly polished surface. You want to use the mirror. The main thing is to get it accurate. So better to do a little extra work now, a few extra hours, and polish it. I've been working on this thing for almost 2 years now, since I started the rough grinding. So a few extra hours work won't matter that much at this stage. I'm sort of being a little careless about my stroke length right now, but I'll just try and add a few long ones right now. Textural says in his book that for thinking about theoretical matters, an excellent time to think about theoretical matters for a telescope and how the polishing works and designs of telescopes and all that. It's really a good time to think about these things when you're actually polishing, as long as you don't let your conclusions dictate to you the actual method of polishing, because that's already been pretty firmly established as what works and as to what works and what doesn't. So I figured that the best thing I can do for myself is to polish just the way the book says, and then think about all the theoretical things as I go along. I'm using slightly longer strokes now for a while, as you can see. These are probably pretty close to 1/3 strokes I'm using now. I'm just going to check the videotape just for a second here, just see that the tape is running through the machine. I can hear the motor running, but that doesn't mean the tape is going. Yep, the tape is running. That's good. The red light is on, which means that theoretically it should be taping, but this is a pretty old VCR, or pretty old video camera. It's about 6 or 7 years old or something. And it wasn't exactly the best one that I could afford. Like, it wasn't really a great one when I bought it. It was just inexpensive. But for my purposes, it seems to work very well. So this is probably going to be kind of boring to anybody that's not interested in telescope making when they see this final video. But I thought of so many little subtle points that I wanted to get across as I'm working around here that I think it's a good idea to just keep the tape running. I put a fresh 2-hour tape in and just tape all my thoughts as I'm working, and give you a pretty good idea what's involved in the actual polishing, the stroke length, what you do. You can see that I'm not thinking entirely about what I'm doing while I'm talking. You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, but on the other hand, it's not not exactly rocket science what I'm doing. It's not that difficult what I'm doing right now. You notice that my position, the way my body worked, changed a little bit then, because there's so much junk in my basement I couldn't get my right foot back to the farthest position on the floor in that one particular spot. So I polished in a slightly different stance on the floor at that one point. So, but that doesn't matter too much, I don't think, just as long as I keep the thing moving. Right now, this is actually not that severe a job. It seems to be functioning really well. I'm not just sure why, but I probably just added just the right combination of water and Barnsite to the tool surface before I started. It's not tending to waltz around or jerk much or twist or anything like that on me right now. It's just a nice smooth motion, which is very nice. As you can see, I'm using approximately, like I say before, 1 double stroke per second. You don't have to do it real fast. But on the other hand, if you do it too slow, you're not, using your time and energy very efficiently. There just seems to be a natural rhythm to the polishing at the speed I'm using now. It just seems to be a natural rhythm to do it. Just a natural sort of a feeling to it when I do it the way I'm doing it right at the moment. Using longer strokes now, or trying to. But right now the tool is letting me have any length of stroke I want and use any amount of W overhang either way I want. It's not hindering me or binding me. It just feels beautiful right now. I'm really surprised. Since this may be my last polishing operation before I start figuring the mirror, it's nice to have it close out with such smooth, dependable motion, because that's more likely to remove any zonal defects in the mirror if you have a nice smooth feel to the polishing. Textural says you sort of develop a feeling for the work you're doing, sort of a rapport with it. So, like I say, that's one reason why I didn't want to play my rock music while I did the polishing. I have done that in the past, though, with polishing various mirrors, but this time I don't think I'll really need to. Now, the figuring, even though I might polish for 2 or 3 hours today, when you're actually